Alright, good morning everybody. Welcome to Sunday morning at Eschaton 2012. This session is Parenting Beyond Belief, Secular Parenting Journey, and we are pleased to have with us Annie Urban, a social, political and consumer advocate on issues of importance to parents, women and children. She regularly uses her blog to create awareness and to advocate for change. The website address is Ph.D.parenting.com. Please join me in welcoming Annie Urban.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone, and welcome. We've got a small crowd here today, so I think we'll keep this fairly informal. I'm happy to answer questions as I go along. We are going to have a Q&A at the end, but certainly if there's anything that you have questions about as I'm going through, then just jump right in, and I'm happy to do that. So I wanted to start with a look at the child's hierarchy of needs, and this is something that I actually put together on my blog a couple of years back, my blog Ph.D.parenting.com, and it was in response to another blogger, Megan Francis. She writes a blog called The Happiest Mom, and she wrote a post called The Mother's Hierarchy of Needs, and so she was looking at, from the perspective of the mother in that parenting relationship, what are your needs, and can you recognize your needs, and can you make sure that you're meeting your needs while you're so busy meeting your children's needs. And I thought it was really interesting and really well done, but wanted to look at the flip side of that, because I think that when you are a parent and when you're in that type of relationship, there is that balancing that always has to happen between your own needs and your child's needs. So looking at how can we, sort of fit the two of those together. So I built, sort of the equivalent being the child's hierarchy of needs, and looked at all of the needs from sort of the physiological all the way up to the self-actualization. And got a really good discussion happening on my blog about the things that I had put in there and how I'd interpreted the sort of more traditional hierarchy of needs as it relates to a child in particular. But I also got a comment from one of my readers who said, it's always interesting to see theories that exclude the importance of recognizing the spiritual needs of the individual. Maslow ignored it completely in looking at what fulfills a person, and to this day people perpetuate his flawed model. That was by Wendy Abrams on my blog. And, I think that for someone for whom spirituality is incredibly important, then it obviously does fit into their hierarchy of needs in terms of what they see as being important and in terms of what fulfills them. And it does, for them, certainly meet some needs. It will provide a lot of people with a sense of security. It will give them a feeling of being loved unconditionally if they believe that there is a God that loves them unconditionally. It gives them friendship and community, often through their churches and other sort of groups that they're involved with. And it gives them a feeling of purpose, that there's some meaning to life, which helps certainly in terms of building self-esteem. So it's not as though spirituality is without any sort of benefit or any meaning when you do look at how you are meeting a child's needs. But I don't think that spirituality is the only way to meet those needs, and so that's why for me I wouldn't necessarily go and put it into that triangle. I think that it is, in the same way as many other tactics that you can use as a parent, is one way of meeting a particular child's needs. And so when you look at things like their need for human touch, that human touch often does and can and should come from a mother. That human touch can also come from other caregivers, and for us having the human touch from the father from a very important age was an incredibly important part of our parenting approach, and being able to have equally shared parenting in our home and make sure that our children were bonded to their father in the same way that they were bonded to their mother. In our home, my mother also played an incredibly important role as a caregiver when our children were small, so making sure they had a bond with her from the start was also incredibly important. So those are things where when you look at that particular triangle and the different levels within it, there's a number of different ways that you can meet your children's needs, and you can adapt that to the form that your family takes on, to your family's preferences, to your family's beliefs, and so on as you go forward. This is a campaign that I really liked a couple of years back. It was by the same people who did the atheist bus campaign, and it was the "Please don't label me, let me grow up and choose for myself." Now, I'm not sure how well you can see the background. Oh, you can see it better than I can. The background behind it, they've got all sorts of things there, like Buddhist child, agnostic child, humanist child, Catholic child, Mormon child, etc., etc. And basically the idea of this campaign was that you should not be putting those labels on your children and deciding, my child is an atheist child, or my child is a Jewish child, or my child is a Buddhist child. That's not up to you as the parent to be deciding. You can certainly share your values, your beliefs, your perspectives with your children, but it's not up to you to put a label on them and to decide what their belief system is going to be, or what religion they would belong to, or anything along those lines. Now, an interesting side note: the children that were used in this campaign. There's this girl that you see here. There's another boy who was used in it as well. It was stock photography that was bought by the campaign. Turns out that those children were from a very ultra-religious Christian family, and their parents were quite upset about them being included in this campaign, but that's what happens when you sell stock photography. So do we need commandments to raise good human beings? When I hear of a lot of in a lot of Christian families and so on, they often sort of go back to those things in terms of, you shall not this and you shall not that, and those end up being sort of the rules that they pass on to their children in terms of what it is that they should be doing and shouldn't be doing. And if there's a why, it's like, well, God says so. And maybe there's more discussion around that, but that tends to be in a lot of cases that very simple answer. In the same way that some parents might be around this time of year making threats in terms of, well, you sure you want to behave like that? Santa Claus is going to see you. There's others that would be saying the same thing about a God, or you don't want to make baby Jesus cry, do you? So there's, those are things, tools that end up being used in parenting to help get your children to behave a certain way and to be sort of, in line a certain way. But do we need those commandments in order to raise good human beings? And I think that's something that often people who are religious say we do. You do need that backing in order to give them their morality. It's not something that I think is essential, and I'll talk a little bit about sort of some of the reasons why not. So if we aren't going to have that religion, if we're not going to have, your little devil and your angel and so on that are there telling you how it is that you should behave, then what approach can you take? For me, it's one very much of love and respect. Love your children, love them unconditionally, show them that love every single day in the way that, you interact with them, and also respect them. When I'm interacting with my children, and when I'm having a conversation with them, or an argument with them, or a disagreement about something, I try to think about how I might have that same conversation with my partner, and I try not to yield power over my children that I wouldn't yield over my partner in that same situation. And I think if you think about it that way and try to think of them as equals, then it makes it much easier to have those conversations. Well, easier is maybe not the right word. It makes it easier to figure out what the best approach might be in that particular situation. It doesn't always make the conversation easier. It's easier, certainly, to put your foot down and say, I'm the parent, and this is the way that things are going to be, and they're going to be that way because I said so, or because, whatever else. But it's much harder, but much more rewarding to treat them as an equal, and to have that conversation, and to discuss the pros and the cons and the options, and how can we get to a place of common understanding in terms of where we're going to go. Now, obviously, as a parent, you have a responsibility to your children that you don't necessarily have to your partner, in that you're also responsible for their safety and security. So that, brings another little bit of nuance into it. But one friend of mine gave an example once that I really like, which is that she wanted to go out and run some errands with her son. Her son did not want the seatbelt done up in his car seat. And she was complaining about it on Twitter, saying, I'm never going to get my errands done, and I'm not going to get through the day, and yada, yada. And people were going back to her and saying, well, aren't you the parent? Why don't you just put your foot down and tell him that he has to put a seatbelt on? And she said, yes, I am the parent, which means that I make sure the car does not move unless he has a seatbelt on. But I'm not going to force him into a seatbelt. That's not my job as a parent. So it's that thing of saying, we need to meet each other's needs, and we need to be respectful of each other. And her child may not have been being respectful of her in that instance, but that doesn't mean that she then should or can, or that it's appropriate for her to be disrespecting her child in that instance and forcing him to have his seatbelt on. So she waits, she talks to him, and patiently, and eventually they get out and they do their errands. So I mean, we need to teach our children to respect others. We certainly do that by modeling that behavior and making sure that we're respecting others, including our children. We also need to teach our children to respect themselves, and I think that we do that by, again, respecting ourselves and modeling that behavior. And that's where, when I go back to those sort of that hierarchy of needs, and for me, I do look at that, whether it's the mother's hierarchy of needs, which is, I mean, mother's only one part of my identity, but that my hierarchy of needs and my child's hierarchy of needs and how the two of them fit together. And that's something that's very important to me, is I'm obviously not going to put my self-actualization needs above my child's physiological needs. And at the same time, I'm not going to put my child's self-actualization needs ahead of my physiological needs. So I'm not going to, you know, if I'm not getting sleep, I'm not getting to eat and stuff like that, I'm not going to go into a craft with my child. I'm going to say, you know what, I haven't had breakfast yet. So I'm going to make myself something to eat, and then we can move on to the craft after that. So it's balancing the two and making sure that you're showing your child that you respect them, but that you also respect yourself in the process as well. There's a couple of books that I wanted to both tell you about, and I can pass them around as well. These are books that were sort of edited, compiled by Dale McGowan, who is a blogger as well on parenting beyond belief. So I'll pass his books around if anyone wants to take a peek. Sorry about the video there. You're certainly welcome to flip through. The first one, The Parenting Beyond Belief, is more essays and stories from people about parenting from different perspectives. And the second one, Raising Free Thinkers, is more different sort of activities or approaches and things like that that you can take in parenting. So it's more the practical side of things. But I like a lot of what Dale puts out on his blog and in the books and so on. And in particular, this sort of, you know, quote from him has been helpful for me in terms of framing how I have conversations with my children about other people and about other people's beliefs. So in the preface to the book, I'm going to quote from him. In the preface to this book, I said that I had set religion aside. Actually, that's a bit like saying someone who rides a bike to work has set traffic aside. I'm still in it, still surrounded by it, and I always will be. Religion, for better or worse, is likely to be a permanent part of the human world. He then goes on to say, the vision we should encourage in our children is not a world free of religion, but one in which no idea or action is granted immunity from discussion and critique, including, of course, our own. And, I really like that piece, and I think that, that's very much the approach that we've taken with our children, is not to say, that we're atheists and therefore we live in this atheist world and that's the only view that we're going to give to our children. There is very much a lot of other worldviews around them, and that's something that they need to learn to understand and to appreciate and to be able to live in a community that includes all of those different values and those different religions and so on as well. I feel quite supported actually in that we live actually just across the river on the other side. We live in Quebec. And in 2008, the Quebec government introduced a new curriculum that's mandatory in all public, private schools as well as in homeschooling. That's on ethics and religious culture. Now, I grew up in Quebec as well, and it used to be that the school boards were Protestant and Catholic school boards in Quebec. And so I was in the Protestant school board. And that meant that when I was growing up, we had moral and religious education was a component of our curriculum. And the morality part was to teach you about what was right and wrong, and the religious part was to teach you about, Jesus and so on and so forth. So you learned about religion from a Christian Protestant perspective, and you learned about the morals that went along with that and how to act properly in any given situation. Now that has changed in Quebec, and what they did was they shifted away from that sort of morality and confessional instruction to a new program that's based on ethics and understanding of different forms of religious expression. So there's three components to that. The first component is reflecting on ethical questions. The second one is demonstrating an understanding of the phenomenon of religion. And the third one is engaging in dialogue. And then the three of those are all interrelated in terms of being able to have a dialogue about how you reflect on ethical questions that brings in your belief system as appropriate, and where you can be engaging in a dialogue with others about that and about how you each make your own decisions and how those decisions are influenced. So my children, who are now in kindergarten and grade 3 in the Quebec school system, have been exposed to different parts of this curriculum. Just as one example, in terms of one of the things that they have done, was they learned about the rituals and so on around birth in different religions and in different cultures, which I thought was incredibly interesting. So instead of going and saying, teaching them religion and saying this is the way that we do things and so on, it's teaching them about different traditions and so on at that young age. And then they've also done a lot of problem solving, so it's things like, you're in this situation and you run into this conflict with another friend, and how can you act in that particular situation? What are some of the options, and then what are the pros and cons of those, and which choice would you choose at the end of the day? So it's really quite interesting the way that they get to learn about all of these different cultures and religions and so on, but without any of it being sort of prescriptive in terms of this is the way that things are done or this is the way that's right. Now they fit that curriculum into a larger context, and I love this diagram here in terms of the Quebec education program. So they've got the student very much at the center of it, and the construction of their identity, empowerment, the construction of their worldview. Around that you have things like citizenship and community life, media literacy, health and well-being, environmental awareness, and consumer rights and responsibilities and so on, and all fabulous things. Then you start to move out to sort of intellectual competencies, communication competencies, and so on. And then outside of that are the more sort of, subject matter areas that you would traditionally think of in terms of your social sciences, languages, mathematics, etc. And then outside of that is where you fit that moral, I'm going back to my own roots, the ethics and religious culture element, where they're then doing that again, that reflecting on ethical questions, demonstrating understanding of religion, and engaging in dialogue. And so they do have a prescribed time set aside for that particular part of the curriculum, but the teachers are also given guidance on how to build that into the other parts of the curriculum. So it ends up being part of what they're doing in terms of mathematics, in English, in sciences, and so on as well. So it gets built and woven into all the parts of the curriculum. So I want to talk now a little bit about some of the different, questions that come up when you're a parent, and the things that you end up having to deal with when you're raising your children without a particular religious sort of background, or even if you are and you come across a religion that's maybe different from your own. So this is a quote from a friend of mine's blog. She writes at Here Be Willers, and her name's Emma Willers. And she wrote about the time when her son, out of the blue, in the car ride on the way home one day, brings up God. So he tells us that God is everywhere and sees everything. He speaks of heaven and God's presence up there. There's a mention of angels. And this was her son talking about a conversation that he had had with another child at school that day. And she's in traffic, she's got baby screaming in the back, and she's thinking, like, what do I do? How do I address this particular situation? So she wrote a nice blog post talking about, how she felt in that scenario and how she dealt with the situation. And sort of threw it out there to other people and said, what would you do? What would you say to your child when he comes home with this truth that does not sort of mesh with your worldview in terms of what the truth is? And so my reply to her was, my son's friend told him that mummies exist and that they come out at night and go into all of our houses. We handled that the same way that we handle discussions about God or about whether infinity is a number. Basically, some people believe it, some people don't believe it, and you can decide for yourself what you want to believe. And, we in some cases go into discussions as well about this is what I believe, this is what Daddy believes, this is what Granny believes, this is what the next door neighbor believes, trying to bring some more sort of, context and so on into the situations as we can to help them. But we try, as much as possible, not to prescribe a truth for our children, and not to prescribe a truth for them that's based on what it is that, that we believe. And even in situations where we do feel like there's an answer, we try as much as possible to sort of take things from an approach of let's explore it together, or let's try and find the answer together. I'm really thankful for the internet. Google is a wonderful parenting tool in terms of being able to say, well, let's go and look that up, and let's go and check it out together and see what it is that we can learn about that. This is my daughter, and when we were living in Berlin, we lived in an area of Berlin called Kreuzberg. That's the most culturally diverse area of the city. and so people from all different cultures, religions, and so on that live there. And I wrote a blog post about what happened one day. I wrote, today, Emma started asking about the hijabs that a lot of women wear. She asked why they wear them. She said that they were beautiful and commented on several times on the aspects of specific hijabs that she liked, the beautiful sparkles, the butterflies, the nice colors, and so on. She asked when she could wear one. And so I had to sit there and think, what do I do in this situation, knowing that, we don't identify as Muslims, we don't have a Muslim background. I know several Muslim feminists who make the choice to wear hijab. I know other Muslims who are forced to wear the hijab. There's all sorts of context and baggage and so on that comes into a discussion about whether you would cover your head or not. And that was all context that, I felt was too much for a 3-year-old to understand at the time. So in that particular instance, I let her wear one. I wasn't sure what I was going to do if she'd asked to wear it outside of the apartment, which she didn't. She took it off after a while. But I did wonder how other Muslims would react if I had let her wear it outside the house, or if she'd wanted to wear it outside the house. So I put the picture up along with the description of what had happened on my blog, and I have a very diverse blog community, and I asked them how they would feel or what they would do in that particular situation, and had a really interesting conversation. And it included everything from professors who were talking about a time when they had a student in their class who was taking components of African culture, and this was a white woman, and the professor felt very uncomfortable in this particular situation where this woman was obviously borrowing a lot of things from another culture without necessarily understanding the significance of them or what it meant for her to be doing that, and that appropriation of someone else's culture and background. But I also had a number of my Muslim blog commenters who jumped in and said that they wouldn't have had any problem with it, that they would have been really happy that she was interested and curious and exploring, and that she was showing an interest in their culture, basically. So they were really intrigued and thought it was great that she did notice and that she was interested in it as well. So you get a conversation going, and that for me is the important thing about all of this, is have a conversation with people and discuss it. In life we get big questions, we get little questions, and I think when we do the question and answer discussion afterwards, we're going to talk a little bit about how you deal with some of the big questions that you get from children in terms of things like, maybe death and what happens after death and that sort of thing. But there's also all sorts of little questions that children ask, and this again came from our time in Berlin. I don't know why that woman is staring at you. I don't know why that girl chose to go to the bathroom stall on the right instead of the one on the left. I don't know why that man isn't wearing any shoes. I don't know why that girl has short hair, or why that woman has green hair. I don't know why the dog did its business on the sidewalk, or why the owner didn't clean it up. I don't know why that child is crying. I don't know why that boy dumped a bucket of sand on your head. I don't know what those people are saying to each other. I don't know why that man is drinking beer on the subway. I don't know why that girl didn't answer your question. I don't know why that woman is talking to herself. I don't know if that's a woman or a man. I don't know why those children won't share their toys. I don't know why the bus driver isn't moving the bus. And I don't know where that man lives. Those were all questions that I was asked over the course of a day on public transit for the most part, or in public parks by my children, and that I did not have an answer to. And what I was trying to teach them around these types of questions too is that not only do I not have an answer, but in some cases it's not appropriate for me to be answering those questions. And that there's some things in life that we should continue to question and to search and to explore the answers for. But there's other things where there isn't an answer, and where it's sometimes just none of our business. And so sort of trying to teach them that line between things that you really should push and push and push and try to answer, and things where you have to say, you know what, I don't know, and that's fine, and it's okay to not know. So when you give your child an answer, you satisfy her for 5 seconds, if you're lucky. But if you teach your child to search for answers, you give her the gift of analytical skills, research skills, perspective, critical thought, skepticism, independent thought, imagination, and so much more. So that's very much the the approach that we try to take, is to sort of explore those questions with our children rather than giving them an answer, whether that's an answer that comes from us or an answer that comes from God or from anywhere else. So that's. Sorry, I did have one more slide. This is another book that I'll share with you, and it's called The World Needs Your Kid. It's by Craig and Mark Kielberger. And this is something when I hear parents who are not religious saying, well, how can I give my children some sort of, morality or help them to understand what's right and what's wrong. This is more the type of book that I would suggest in those instances, and it really talks about how to teach your child to, to get that passion and want to make a difference in the world and to be a good human being. And it's a really incredible book that covers a lot of things like teaching compassion and empathy, responsibility, finding your own gift and your own passion, thinking about the box in terms of coming up with solutions for dealing with the issues that you see in the world, getting involved with a cause that you believe in, and a lot more. So I can certainly share that one around as well if anyone wants to take a look at that. And that's the end of the presentation component. And I think now I'll let the two of you introduce yourselves, and then we can do some questions and answers and discussion.
Hi, my name is Crystal. I'm a child and youth worker and a registered early childhood educator. I have worked in Britain in the Women's Refuge for domestic violence with children. I also do some of the children who have autism. And I've recently written a book that I'm hoping to have published about dealing with the grieving process and death for children without religious context or spiritual context of any kind. That's it. So hopefully if you have any questions, you know where my background lies.
Hi, my name is Tress, and I'm also a registered early childhood educator. I'm currently the supervisor of daycare back where we live in Sudbury. And well, my background is all early childhood education, but I also have some parental experience on raising half atheist and half Catholic, and the just everything interesting that comes out of that.
I thought of something else too. If anyone has questions about alternative lifestyle, parenting, polyamory, that sort of thing, we can cover that also.
I mean, maybe we'll open the floor and see if there's any questions from anyone here, and if not, we'll cover this one.
I'll start then. So questions about creating a community. I know in the U.S. especially it can be very difficult to find a community that isn't through a church. And I'm wondering, for you, how you're finding that, and also from an alternative lifestyle. Are you finding acceptance? Are you finding that bond?
Because Sudbury is very small, we don't really fit into any one community. We pretty much are the community. But as far as acceptance goes, I think we've had more people from every walk of life, whether it be at work, the majority of our families, and even we're on the Gay Pride Committee. We're running the Gay Pride Committee this year, and they're okay with it. So the majority of the smaller communities in Sudbury have accepted us.
Actually, I have a couple of things that I wanted to ask about your presentation, if that's all right.
Sure, well, maybe I'll answer that, and then, get back to that. So I think, for me, I think to some extent we're lucky in that we live in what is becoming predominantly a secular society in Quebec. So we haven't come across much a situation where it's sort of like, oh well, we can't hang out on Sunday because we're going to church or anything like that. I think that for the most part, the other families that have come across our path are also not necessarily religious. So we've been able to find sort of communities to a great extent through our children's school, through their activities, as well as through the local community. There was, when our kids were little, there was a local play group that's sort of run by the municipality. So our children went there. We met a number of other local families there, so we've been able to create a community through that. But for me personally, as a parent and connecting with other parents in this sort of parenting journey, the online community has been absolutely critical, both in terms of connecting with other parents in Ottawa as well as sort of around the world in terms of what it is that I'm doing. I spent a lot of time, especially when I had newborns and so on. You can't necessarily always sort of go out in the evening, and we live a fair way out of the city too, so I would just, I'd spend my evening with the newborn on my lap. She's nursing, sleeping, and I'm able to have these conversations with all these other people online. So that's been a huge community builder for me, for sure.
So the first point was the section we were talking about giving children answers versus teaching them to think. I think that at least in Ontario, the government has taken a giant step in education with that. In the immersion curriculum, and I'm not sure if everyone here is familiar with immersion curriculum now, but rather than having teachers sit with cue cards and drill children, 1 + 1 = 2, it's more about learning the oneness of one and the two-ness of two, playing in the sandbox, filling cups and dumping them, learning those physics concepts right from the beginning, so that when they get to, say, grade 1 or 2, and then they have the written symbol, they'll have a better understanding of what that means, and teaching them to think critically, to ask those questions, and then to go out into the community and find the answer, rather than just simply telling them. So I think we've had some progress in the education department, at least in Ontario, in the past few years. It's very exciting. One other thing I wanted to say was someone asked me about commandments. And if we need those things to know the difference between right and wrong, we've come a long way in the form of behavior management and discipline with children. Before it was a threat, God's watching you, God will punish you, or from your parents, corporal punishment. The children behave because they're afraid, not because they know the difference between right and wrong. So what we're trying to do now is deal with natural and logical consequences. If you don't wear your mittens outside, your hands will be cold. And also teaching empathy so that they care what happens to people, and when they learn every action has a consequence, and can you deal with the consequence of your action, that will teach them the difference between right and wrong and those values.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I just to respond to that, and I think that's something that I've certainly seen in my children's school as well, is that, they do go as far as sort of having timeouts as sort of maybe the ultimate consequence if they really can't resolve it in another way, but there's a lot of other behavioral techniques that they'll use first, and one instance is that sort of trying to, understand what you did, why that was problematic and what you maybe could have done instead. And so, my son went through a period where he was entertaining his classmates all the time by saying poo. And so it was poo, 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 poo all the time. And the teacher at one point said, okay, enough. and so she got him to draw what he was doing and what he could do instead. And so he drew got a picture of himself in the little balloon bubble, and it says poo. And then he drew another picture of himself on the other side with the little balloon bubble, and it's blank. And it was the most hilarious picture, and I had trouble not laughing when I saw it, and I scanned it in and I posted it on my blog, and we had an interesting discussion about that too. But I thought that was another, and that's a very, very simple scenario, but I think even in other situations where it's sort of maybe, a child has hit another child or things like that, then they get them to go through that thought process and that, creative process too, of being able to say, okay, what was maybe, wrong with the approach that I chose, and what could I have done instead of that particular scenario.
Exactly, and we have to remember that humans are animals, and while as we get older we learn the etiquette, and it's not okay to hit people, it takes a great deal of practice to get that emotional control and self-regulation, and some adults still have not mastered that. So for a 3-year-old, they get upset, they hit, it's a natural thing. Then we just have to come back and teach them, role playing and that sort of thing. Timeout it's sort of being phased out, but is used sometimes when someone is out of control emotionally, just to give them that time to calm down before you can enter into a situation where you can reason with them. But I think it has come a long way from schools with the nuns that would just take the hands with the ruler and expect you to behave. I think it's come a long way. So I'm hoping that the next generation of adults will at least have some ability to do the reasoning themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it was more a comment that there's no consequence like the natural consequence. That's sort of a mantra that we have in our house. So I thought I'd tell a small anecdote. That at one point he was, I think, 3 years old at the time, my middle son, and it was winter. It was -5, -10 degrees out. There was some snow, and he refused to put on any clothes. He wanted to go, but he refused to put on any clothes. And it's cold out there. You got so after 10 or 15 minutes, we just said, "Fine, then let's go." He put on his knapsack and was otherwise stark naked. I can't imagine where he gets it from, but he's a little stubborn. And he made it about 2.5 blocks. And then he said, "Okay, I'm cold." So we had brought all of his clothes. So we're 2.5 blocks. We're outside one of our friends' houses on the sidewalk, and we're putting him in his clothes. But it meant that we've never had that fight again. And so our philosophy is, look, what's the worst thing that can happen? Like, is it life-threatening? Is it going to do permanent damage? If the answer comes out to be no to that test, fine. And it turns out that I think every single house we passed, people were at their windows at that moment, or they knocked on their walls and everyone came to the windows, because everyone, we are now famous for being the parents who let their kids in midwinter walk in. But fortunately, the reaction that from almost everyone in the community is much like in this room. They thought it was hilarious and great, but it also taught him a lesson that we could have told him we were blue in the face, you're cold, frostbite, whatever. It wasn't the first thing we thought of, but we were warned. I was like, fine, go ahead. I almost did it out of anger or frustration, but it turned out to be a really...
That's a perfect example of that same point again. You could tell him a million times you need to wear your coat because it's cold, but he learned that himself, and he won't have to struggle with that anymore.
Now there's just the 2 billion other things he needs to learn about to navigate in the world. No, you can't juggle chainsaws. No, I'm not going to let you try it.
Yeah, and that's the thing, is that, natural consequences are a magical and wonderful thing when there is an obvious one, and it's one that, that teaches a really easy lesson. I find it harder when there isn't, and when it's not an immediate natural consequence, or when the consequence comes to someone else rather than to that child, and that's when it has to be more about a conversation rather than about them realizing it right away. And, one of them is, for example, what they eat. And that's something where if they're eating junk all the time and they're not eating healthy food, they don't, sure, they might feel a little tired, whatever but they aren't going to notice a difference between going through the day eating your fruits and your vegetables and your this and that versus eating junk food all day. But yet it is going to have, it can have a long-term consequences for their health, and it can be incredibly expensive for the parents who are having to then, pay for the cavities to be filled and all of that type of thing. So it's those types of situations that I find, much more challenging, and
cause and effect. Is really hard for adults. That's why we have science.
Yeah, and in those difficult situations too, I think adults just need to have a little patience and actually explain it to the child rather than just because I said so. They need to know, and even if it's slightly scary, about choking on your food, or if it's something that's very dangerous, they kind of age appropriate, but explain it to them so that they can see, oh, that's really not a good idea. Explain what the consequence will be.
Question back there?
On the same vein, trying to teach the things that do not have immediate consequences, like currently our 2-year-old is not too fond of brushing his teeth, whereas he had been, participating quite well, and I keep on trying to, mentor it and show that we're doing it too, and how to do it properly and such. But you only so many times let them do kind of a half-assed job before you're like, well, these really do need doing. And kind of, I have come to the point, not every day, but I will have to hold them down to get actual a good toothbrushing, because you're thinking we can't let it slide every day, and you try to be gentle and have that discussion. And I was just thinking if there's any helpful ways of teaching those longer consequences. I mean, we can tell him that his teeth will hurt, and he can understand that concept, I believe. But to reiterate that twice a day, and I was wondering if you had any.
Did you want to respond to that?
I had some experience with that. I had a 2-year-old who also wasn't that enthusiastic.
I don't think there's any 2-year-old.
Yeah.
But once I took her to the dental hygienist,
Yeah.
and the dental hygienist explained the importance of it, it became more of a task that she was given by someone else. So I think that there is, right, that was the professional, and
Yeah.
the professional told her that she had to brush her teeth, and she was much more enthusiastic about it after she went to the dental hygienist.
And I think at 2, that was thinking enough that they'll be able to.
It's a process.
Yeah.
But it was.
That's why they lose that. So they can get
You can make it fun also. You
Yeah.
can get the house students to come in, they give you it's a blue coating for your
Yeah.
teeth, and they get them to brush, and then they put the black light and they can see all the germs still in their teeth.
Yeah.
They do the same thing with hand washing. You can do a science experiment to show them what would happen to sort of show tooth decay.
Yeah.
And that's it, explaining the consequence to them so they can visually see it. I don't want my teeth to look like that. I'm going to brush my teeth.
I think sometimes for a 2-year-old, even the best approach is, here, go choose out your own toothbrush that you get to use every day, and they're more apt to use it if they can choose it themselves.
Yes, we do have options for that.
Yeah, and it's one of the posts on my blog is about my discipline spectrum, and it's sort of there's sort of that everything from laissez-faire all the way up to the very authoritarian sort of or even abusive sort of parenting style on the other end, and then there's all these choices in between, right? And so what I like to say is that there's a sweet spot that I have that is sort of modeling and natural consequences and things like that, but then there can be a little bit where you in certain scenarios where that's obviously not just working, you can creep out a little bit into sort of and depending on what it is, in some cases it might be towards the laissez-faire when you decide this just really isn't that important and I'm just going to let it go. And then in other cases it's over onto the other side where you might start to say, okay, well, I am maybe going to look at some non-natural consequences or some, try a reward or punishment and things like that. And those are things that I don't like to incorporate in every day, but they are in some instances my absolute sort of last resort. And so we did have with our son, he was 3 and about to start preschool, and the preschool didn't accept you if you weren't toilet trained. And he was fine in terms of being able to urinate on the toilet, and he did that and everything, but he would ask for a diaper every time he needed to go poop. And then he would go and stand in his closet, and he would do it in his diaper, and then he would request to, get cleaned up and out of the diaper and back into his underwear. And this was stubborn, would absolutely not try to go on the toilet at all. And we tried everything in terms of, sometimes he would agree to sit, but it would just never happen. And it would be, he'd sit there, we'd read books, we'd play games, we'd this and that and everything else. And we were never shy about letting him come in when we were in there, so it wasn't like he hadn't seen it or didn't know what was going on. And so eventually it's a week before preschool is supposed to start, and he's going to lose his spot to another kid if he can't get this taken care of. And so Saturday morning, the Toys R Us flyer comes in the newspaper. We said, you pick something out in there, then you go and do a poo on the toilet, and then we're going to Toys R Us and we're going to buy it. And that's not a parenting tactic that I like to use every day, not one that I could afford to use every day, but it was that thing where we said, we've been trying everything we could possibly imagine for the last 6 months to get you to do this, and it's not happening, so here we go. Let's just do this.
Well,
and it's done that day.
It's a tool, right? And the key thing, at least for me with parenting, is to have as many tools as possible, so that if this is the exception, then wow, this is a big thing. I'm going to do it. But if that's a weekly event, well, I'm just not going to do what she wants, so that I'll get my Toys R Us.
Exactly.
I'll get the bribe of whatever nature it is. When it's no longer truly an exception, but becomes part of the routine, then the routine can be manipulated.
And I think that becomes a problem, whether it is a reward, whether it's a punishment, whether it's hitting your child, and that's the thing, is that with a lot of parent-child sort of relationships and things like that, it does slip into that, and so it starts, it sort of can it can go down there. So it's sort of I smacked him once because it was really, really horrible thing that he did, and then it becomes smacked him again and smacked him again and smacked him again, and so I think with a lot of, you just have to be careful it doesn't go down that slippery slope.
As atheists, we pretty much know by now that there are a number of solutions to any problem, and we're really good at thinking outside the box. So that story I actually heard from a friend of mine. It was a really interesting way of dealing with that problem. The child had an attachment to the diaper, so what they did was slowly weaned him off the diaper by placing him on the toilet with the diaper on, and then putting a diaper in the potty so he could sit on the potty but still go on the diaper. And then slowly they would sort of cut the diaper up so there'd be smaller and smaller pieces of this diaper in the potty until finally one day he was okay just going in the potty. And that was sort of an out there idea, but it definitely worked for that child.
And it's different kids, different things. So that was one of the ones that we had tried as well. We even bought every book out there in terms of how to do this, and that was one of the things. And for him, it was he wouldn't do it sitting down. So it didn't matter whether there was a diaper on or not. He wanted to be standing in his closet to do it. So I think it was the sitting more than anything else that ended up being the big barrier. So,
I take it you are parents. You have a child?
I had some parental experience. I had a partner that had 2 children whom I became the stepmother to.
Okay, because the question that I had, I'm a parent, but I'm also a kindergarten teacher. And so the question that I had was, what, if anything, did you tell adults who you were leaving with the children with, such as teachers or caregivers, about alternative lifestyles, whether that be, the child's own family situation and religious beliefs? Did you tell them anything or not? And if you did tell them anything, in what way was it handled?
I'm going to use my oldest as an example. When she first started the first grade, they drew, she's going to be 10 actually in January. When she started the first grade, within the first month they had to draw a picture of their families. And she went to a Catholic school. Not my choosing, but as a step-parent, you don't really have that say. And so when she was asked to draw this picture, she drew a picture of a house, and she put herself in front of it, her little sister Rue, my ex-partner, and myself. My ex-partner is a woman. And then she drew a bigger establishment, apartment building, and drew a picture of her dad. She stood up in front of the class and said, "This is a picture of my family. This is my mama. This is my stepmom, my sister Rue, me, and our dog Lulu. This is my dad. He lives in an apartment across town." And the teacher stood up and said, "Oh, you must be mistaken, Zoe. Your stepmom lives with your daddy." And she stood up, and she was red in the face and argued with her teacher. When she came home, and she was very upset. So, with her, and actually with her too, it really wouldn't matter what we told other people, who they'd be the first ones to tell, the truth.
But the teacher did not previously know about the family situation.
No more than any other child in that classroom. I think what the problem is, and I've seen it in the EC profession, and again in schools, is that teachers seem to have this pre-thought, this is a child that has a mother and a father, the end. We know that's not true. Some parents are single parents, same-sex parents, grandparents, foster, adoptive, polyamorous. Kids come from all kinds of different families. But this teacher just assumed that kid had even though the parents were divorced, kid had a mom, and then a dad and a stepmom. So I've seen it in daycares too. There was that situation in the daycare. I've seen, there was a little boy who was being raised by his dad because his mom left. And the educator didn't take that into account and wrote on Mother's Day, for Mother's Day, on the present wrote, "Happy Mother's Day, I love you," for the father. And I had that child in my group too. And I had written, thank you, Daddy, for all that you do, instead of Happy Mother's Day. And it's just accommodating these kids, and and in some cases, yeah, I think when we have children with our partner, we're definitely going to have to go into the school and say, look, this is the situation, and we're going to have to meet with the teacher every year and say, this is our child. He or she has 3 parents. And we're going to have to make that known. Otherwise, there's going to be some hurt feelings and a lot of misunderstandings.
And I think, one of the challenges for us on the other side of it is that we're in a heterosexual relationship, and we have 2 children, and so they have a mommy and a daddy, and they go to a school where they are teaching through the curriculum about other sort of families and that type of thing. But yet, just about every other kid in their class is also in that same situation of having, a mother and a father in most cases in a married relationship. Not necessarily always married, because in Quebec that's not as popular these days, but in a committed monogamous sort of relationship and that type of thing. And so my kids don't always see the diversity that I would like them to see, so that's something where we have to be able to bring them that diversity through other ways and through other things that we expose them to. You don't want to go out and, sort of pick I'm going to have my black friend and I'm going to have my gay friend and my this and that, but you have to find ways to expose your children, whether it is through the media, through the places that you go to, through the things that you talk about, and that type of thing, to all sorts of other different options as well, so that they don't start to think that there's a default in the same way that so many other people in society think that there's a default.
Sort of away from this topic, but getting back more to parenting without belief, I'm wondering about your experiences with dealing with, if this happens to you, extended family who are not accustomed to the model that you're working with, whatever that model is.
My mom raised me in a Catholic household, moderately so. Go to church every Sunday, but Christmas was still about Santa, reindeer, and Frosty the Snowman. And I have to say, she's a little concerned that I'm not. And this came even before I met my partners, that I was not baptizing my child. I said, I'm an atheist. Why the hell would I baptize my kid? That's ridiculous. Yeah. She said, you have to give them some sort of religious belief. I said, no. That if they decide later in life they want a religious belief, then that's up to them, not up to me. I can introduce them to, if they're curious, explain, this religion and that religion, and if they decide that that's for them, then hey, all the power to you. But I told her I refuse to enforce a religion on my child that I don't believe in. It would be like a Jewish person coming up and giving a Catholic person crap for not circumcising their son and letting them eat ham. It makes absolutely no sense.
I was also raised in a Catholic family, and when I got to grade 8 and we were supposed to do our confirmation, and I realized it was a choice, and I said no. I took a whole lot of flack from my family, and I made a really tough decision at that point to let my family know exactly who I was, and if I didn't want them to love a concept of me that wasn't true. I wanted them to love me for who I was. So I let them know who I was, and it made a very difficult decision that whoever couldn't accept that were not really part of my family, and I didn't want them in my life. So how that translates to your question about children is when I finally do have children, my family will be told in detail that this is the situation and this is how we're raising the children, and if you can't be on board with that, then I'm sorry, you can't be around.
We've only had a few sort of instances at all. I mean, one was really when my son was a baby, and my aunt sent us a christening gown for him. And it's like, well, that's not going to get used. It'll be a nice, rag for cleaning the house or whatever. But it was really, what do I do with this? I think in the end we donated it, but it was sort of like a completely irrelevant gift in that instance. But he was still an infant, so it's not like, giving a cross to a 6-year-old or something like that, where there's some meaning attached to it. The only other sort of instance that we've come across is not so much when people forcing their religion on us, but just having to explain someone else's religion to our children, but that's something that we expect to have to do on a regular basis anyway. So that was when my niece was baptized, and so they didn't know what this was about, and why did Katie get a party when they didn't get a party, and that type of thing, right? So that was sort of explaining them that and what they believe and why they do that type of thing, and that sort of thing. But it's the only, fortunately for us, the only time that that's come up.
I have been.
There's a whole bunch of
For me, it's interesting looking at your experience because Crystal and Tress, you work in an environment where probably the children see some turnover amongst their peers. And you obviously have traveled. And I'm wondering how you deal with the experience in its varying degrees of trauma of dealing with your children with the breaking of the non-familial relations. Friends, how do you help them deal with it? Whether there's some sense of finality in some cases, or whether because again, it differs with age of child, in helping them maintain continuity if they express a strong emotional bond with the child.
My daughter's very social, and she has tended with those types of things that, one friend's gone, she just finds the next one, and she's always like, she's the social butterfly. You ask her who her best friend is, she'll rattle off the 15 kids in her class. And so it hasn't been for her yet sort of a traumatic situation in terms of one person goes, they get replaced by someone else, and that's been fine. With my son, it's been a bit more difficult in that we've never had him formally diagnosed, but he may be sort of mildly on the spectrum. And so he doesn't always necessarily get the social cues. And so for him, the problem that we've had is with other people who have decided that they don't want to be friends with him anymore, and that were his best friend previously, and he doesn't get the social cues and doesn't recognize, and then really misses those people. And it's really hard to explain to him why someone may have moved on. And even though he does have other friends that like him very much and that he enjoys doing things with, he'll still come back years later to, why can't Luke come over for a play date? And for a while it was, Luke was still in the same school but then eventually they went to another school, but still he's always wanting me to call up his mom to try and set up a play date. And it's always a difficult conversation trying to explain why that's probably not going to go anywhere, and I don't know that I have a great answer, but we talk about it, and that's the best that we can do. So,
the idea of grief and loss does not necessarily only pertain to death. For a child, it could be they've lost their blanket, their favorite toy, or it could be a friend, or in the sense of daycare, a lot of children become very attached to the educators there. They spend sometimes 9 hours a day with these people, so they're sometimes just as attached to them as their own parents. So I had a situation where staff was leaving, gave, say, 2 weeks' notice to us, but did not tell the children, and it was their last day. And I became very upset with this person because they were robbing them of the opportunity to go through that grieving process with them and saying goodbye. So it was really rushed. People don't give children enough credit, I think, for what they can handle and what they can deal with. So when I left my previous job, I told them about a month in advance. I told the children I'm going to a new school. We did a lot of talking about it. We made cards and dropped in to visit afterwards, and then after someone leaves, we can still talk about them. We have pictures in the classroom. We can go back and remember the people that have left. And they're still our friends. They're just not here right now. So it's sort of don't shelter them from that. Don't cut it off and pretend that they don't exist now that they're out of sight, out of mind.
That's actually the caregiver thing has been a bigger issue for us than sort of friends their age, and that there have been several situations where a teacher got let go from the school. Our kids go to a private school, so it's not like a public school where it's really hard to fire them. And so just even a disagreement with the administration can result in a teacher being let go. And they haven't been good about letting the children go through that process of saying goodbye. So we've had a child, a teacher a caregiver who was an incredibly important part of our children's lives for several years and is suddenly gone. And my approach to that has been that I'm never Facebook friends with my kids' teachers while they're still at the school. But once they've left, I've gone and found those teachers on Facebook and established a connection with them so that my children can continue to communicate with them after they've gone, and they've all been very open to that so far.
The children tend to take things very personally too, especially when their parents separate, and if an educator is leaving, they somehow internalize that it's their fault. So it's really important to let them know it's not your fault. They're just going to a different school, and I still love you. That sort of thing.